So I made a game called Sponge in home games, and my plan for today is to do a little bit of a show and tell. Kind of show the game, play it a little bit, and then do a little bit of a deeper dive into how it works, but not going super in depth in the code. You can do that if you like. I'll post the commit in the YouTube description. But anyway, I'm going to start a new session, and you will see Sponge. So obviously this is inspired by Pong, and originally we were just going to do that, black background, white squares and stuff like that. But the intention of this game was to kind of have more thorough use of all the components of home games, like the assets, including sound and images, and just having things interact with each other quickly. Just trying to see how intense we can make a game using this system, trying to push the boundaries. So what you see happening here is neither of the paddles are moving. The ball is just moving in a random direction, or it's a bubble, I guess. The original intention was like a dirty bubble. I don't think that really came through. But anyway, so the ball is moving in these directions, and I can click on the left side of the screen. I'm just one player here. Left side of the screen moves the left thing, and the right side of the screen moves the right thing. I'll show you two-player stuff later because that behavior changes. But right now, I'm basically playing against myself. And let me try to get one of them to bounce. Yeah, so bouncing. And right here, we're just kind of, you see so right there, it was just kind of bouncing back and forth like the original Pong did, where it would just be kind of predetermined paths, and it would just invert the existing path. And an early version of this, that's what I did, but I didn't think that was super fun. So what actually happens now when a ball collides with the paddle is that it'll randomly move in some Y direction. Like it'll reflect off of the X, but it'll either go up, down, or middle in the Y direction to kind of make it more chaotic, I guess, which I think makes the game more fun. So one thing you'll notice too is that when the ball makes it past the paddle, it doesn't fully make contact with the wall behind it. And that's because the game is essentially saying the second that the person would score, we're just going to stop the round and move on to the next one. I'm not going to keep showing you where the ball would go because that would just be for show. Kind of a weird experience, and I think I'd like to fix that at some point. But right now, it works. So very simple. This is basically just Pong with some randomness and some cool Sponge assets. One other thing about assets is I'm going to turn on my sound, and hopefully this comes across in the thing. So I have sound. That horrible clanking sound is what happens when it hits the wall, either the top or bottom wall. And then I have another one for when it makes contact with the sponge. So, damn, that is super quiet. So that was a bug because it was making constant contact with that lower wall. So I think it just sent out hundreds or thousands of those place sound things. So, you live and learn. That's me finding a bug. But let me refresh here, go back. The sounds didn't come through for the sponges because it's very quiet and I'm not recording it with computer audio. I'm using my other microphone. Just trust me, there are sponge sounds. I will show you here me recording the sponge sounds. It's real sponge activity that is being recorded. This isn't faked, all authentic over here. Right, so I mentioned earlier that this is just like the one player mode, but obviously we would support up to 2. And so what I'm going to do is in another tab, join the session. I'm going to join the same session in another tab and show how the behavior changes. So before, when I clicked on the left and the right, it would move the right paddle. But now because I'm player 2, where if I click on the right, I'm moving the right paddle and I can't move the left. It would be nice if I can touch anywhere on the screen to move the right paddle, but that's, again, another small improvement I can make in the future. And then similarly, on the first player's screen, if I click on the right, I can no longer move the green paddle, but if I click on the left, I can move the left. And then if I quit over here on the oh, shit. All right, I didn't test that one before the video, but, another example of a bug. So what I think it's trying to do there in that specific case is it's moving the ball in 2 different paths at the same time. So that flickering is the ball really quickly going between 2 different paths that it thinks it's on. There's not actually 2 balls. It's one ball in 2 places, if that makes sense. But anyway, obviously there are some things to fix here, and that leads into the code. So I was originally going to rewrite this whole thing before this video, but I think it kind of makes it more interesting to show you how broken it is and why it's broken without going super in depth about why. But it can be summed up with, I didn't know where I was going when I started writing the code for this. It's like the Michael Scott quote, I'll start sentences without knowing where I'm going to finish them or whatever. But the right quote, not what I just said. So anyway, here's the code. In total, it's about 600 lines. Most of it is kind of set up and metadata stuff, and the logic is probably about half of that. So just going through here, metadata to tell the home game system about basic things, what it's called, how to render it, like the aspect ratio and stuff like that. So let's go through the different pieces of this. Player sides is how I'm figuring out how I'm mapping a certain player ID to which side of the screen they're on. Just super basic. I eventually put a left key and a right key in here and then map it to a player. So pretty simple. Game started, pretty self-explanatory. By default, it's false. Once the ball starts moving, it's true. I had to use that to fix a similar bug of the ball moving in two paths, so I don't try to start moving the ball when it's already moving. And so this is what I did for that. I just need to use it in the other case that I just showed, where someone quits the game and I try to move the ball from there. So anyway, so this is all the assets. There are some images and there are some audio files. So Beep and Boop, the original names, because it was kind of like a Atari style old school type thing. So there was a literal beep and boop, but now those are sponge sounds that I have recorded. And then Pluck is the name of the sound that plays when you hit the top or the bottom, the one that made that sick beat earlier. And then Sync, well, all this stuff from here on out is images. So Sync is the background gray thing that you see, behind everything. Ball, pretty self-explanatory. Left paddle, right paddle. Those are just images that I drew and imported into homegames.io. And then I'm referencing those asset IDs here. And then, yeah, this is all just some setup of actually constructing the core pieces, turning those assets into nodes that exist on the screen, and some basic handlers. Not super interesting. But yeah, this is how it works. It's kind of like a two-level structure where there's this base, and then it has all these assets as children of it, like direct children of it. So those are all just like that's like a two-layer thing, I guess, for the way it's rendered. Yeah, and then we have key listeners. So I showed clicking and moving the paddles like that, but really what you can also do is doing up arrow, down arrow, W or S to move your thing. So that's all this is here. It's kind of setting a value to be popped off on the next render, as opposed to constantly reading your key down and trying to move it just whenever you say. We kind of say, okay, well, the next time we have a tick, then we're going to apply your movement to that. So it kind of makes a smoother experience overall. So that's how that works. Handle new player. This is just some basic code to, okay, this should be rewritten. But essentially this is the logic to say, oh, a player, something happened with my players. Let me recalculate my logic to see, when someone clicks something, what do I move? So yeah, that's all just logic to handle player changes and update the game state as a result. Similar thing here for player disconnect. And actually, I'm going to fix that bug. The first ever live bug fix right here. Like I mentioned, that game started flag, I just needed to use it. So I'm pretty sure this should fix that specific case I had earlier. Let me just test it out. So just to test out that bug, what happened was I was on the first player and then disconnected the second, and now that no longer breaks, which is fantastic. So yeah, first ever bug fix and first ever episode of I Made a Game. So these are some helper methods here: update left paddle position and update right paddle position. This is kind of hacky as well. What's happening here is there is an underlying invisible block representing the right paddle and the left paddle as well as the ball, and there's an asset layer on top of it. So to update a position, you actually have to update both. And then in the case of an asset, you're updating its coordinates, like the actual representation of where it is in the game, and then the coordinates of the asset that is in the. It's confusing and it's kind of stupid. This is like a miss in the design of the way that these assets are rendered, and kind of I don't need this underlying layer. I really could just use this one thing. But anyway, similar thing for update ball position, because they're all just, like I said, invisible things with assets on top. And start ball. So this is essentially start game. This is what was happening twice just now, what I was showing, which is saying, hey, the ball, I'm going to put it in the 50-50 spot, like the middle of the screen, and then I'm going to generate a random path for it, and then it's going to go in that path until it hits a wall or a paddle. And so we're using this new physics get path function that I made here, which is just, exactly what I said, which is when it starts, given a start point and an end point and a velocity, give me the path to follow to hit that end point. So that's that. Play sound is just something that we call whenever something interacts with another thing, and then we have some logic to say, what sound am I playing? Did I hit a wall? Did I hit the paddle? That's what this is here. Hacky and shitty. Again, not great code. I'm not going to talk about the code. It's bad. So move ball is kind of the core logic of the whole thing. It's this one giant method full of if statements and full trash. So the core of move ball is an interval. It's essentially just an update time, like every 40 milliseconds, every 50 milliseconds or whatever, do something. And so that something is keep moving the ball, right? If we have a path and we're on a certain point, move to the next point in the path. And so here is, like I said earlier, where we kind of pop off the input cue for the players. If they wanted to move up or down for either paddle, then we would be applying that here within this kind of core update timer, essentially. And so bounce is all of the fake math. So when we hit a wall, where do we go after that? If I come from the right up into a wall, you would expect just in your natural brain that it would bounce down into the left. And I spent a lot of time half-ass mathing it, like trying to get it just right. And I basically gave up at a certain point because I couldn't get the directions. I can get the velocities, but I couldn't get the directions consistently because I'm not the best. So this is all hard-coded cases, and I added these comments. But we say if it was going down into the right, then we can figure out it's only going to hit two possible things. It's either going to hit the right paddle or wall, or it's going to hit the bottom wall, but you can't go down and right and hit the top or the left. And so essentially that's applied to everything. Right down left, up, etc. So all these if statements are just that, and saying, okay, change the x velocity to this, the y velocity to this, blah, 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 blah. And then if I have a new x and y velocity, apply it. And again, since this is bounce, we know we hit something, so we play a sound. It's terrible. Okay, so the final thing is grant point. Pretty simple, but when there's logic in the move ball part that will say, if I've bypassed the edge, like if I'm going left and I surpass the rightmost part of the left paddle, or vice versa, if I'm going right and I surpass the leftmost part of the right paddle, then I know they missed. And that's what I was saying earlier, that the ball doesn't continue hitting the wall, it just stops and then it kind of resets. And it's because the game knows you can't hit it, you're not going to save it, grant point. And that's what this does here. It'll just change the internal value that it has for the scores, and then update on the screen, which is what you see at the top here. And that's pretty much it. That's Sponge. Like I said, several things I could fix, but at this point I think it's at a state where I could show it to people, and overall pretty happy with the way that this moves. Like, this ball is moving pretty smoothly to my eye. I don't know the actual frame rate, and also just like that little case right there, it felt like I should have been able to hit it, but I don't. I can't. It could be better. Thank you for watching. I made a game. Leave some feedback, if you liked this or want to see more of stuff like this, or maybe more of an in-depth thing, if you want me to go into code or whatever. Anyway, let me know. Thank you for watching. See you later.